The cough tore through the cabin's oppressive silence, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Brittle. Seraphina flinched, her fingers tightening on the microscope's focus knob. The motion was minuscule, a tremor of a millimeter, but in the sterile, controlled world she had built, it was an earthquake. Her breath hitched. Focus. The command was a shield. She didn't dare look toward the closed bedroom door, because she knew what she would see. She could picture it with perfect, agonizing clarity. Alara, curled on her side, a porcelain doll growing more fragile by the day, her skin so thin it was like tracing paper over blue veins. As a result, Seraphina poured her entire world onto a glass slide. Her universe was a petri dish, a gas chromatograph, a desperate search for a single, undiscovered alkaloid that could halt the cellular decay that baffled every specialist they'd seen. The specialists with their kind, pitying eyes and their useless, empty words. A genetic anomaly, one had said, his voice soft. A 1 in a million case of bad luck. Bad luck. The phrase was a mockery. This wasn't bad luck, it was a thief, a silent, creeping shadow that was stealing her little sister piece by agonizing piece. In fact, that was why she was here, tucked away in this isolated cabin at the edge of the Heartwood Forest. She had to be here because the world-class hospitals and the brilliant doctors had failed. She had to find the answer herself because if she didn't, who would? The thought was a cold weight in her chest, heavy and suffocating. Another sample analyzed. Another dead end. The data on her laptop screen confirmed it. A flat line where a spike of hope should be. Useless. With a sigh that carried the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights, she cleaned the slide with practiced, almost violent precision. The scent of isopropyl alcohol was sharp, sterile, the only perfume she knew anymore. Maybe it was fate that had brought them to the edge of these woods, a place steeped in local legends and hushed warnings. The locals spoke of the Heartwood Glade, the forest's deep, forbidden heart, in whispers. They said it was a place of strange energies, a place where things got lost, a place you didn't come back from. Superstitious nonsense, of course. Even so, her research pointed there. Ancient botanical texts, forgotten naturalist diaries, they all hinted at flora in that glade that existed nowhere else on Earth. Rare blooms with impossible properties. Her last desperate scientific hope. Her gaze fell on the topographical map pinned to the wall, a red circle drawn around the glade's supposed location. It felt less like a destination and more like the edge of the world. She didn't know what scared her more, the thought of going into that forest, or the thought of what would happen if she didn't. Come morning, the forest floor was a tapestry of damp earth and decaying leaves. Sun slanted through the thick canopy in hazy golden shafts, painting the world in shades of green and brown. This was her laboratory now. Seraphina moved with a quiet competence, her boots making soft sounds on the mossy ground. She took samples, her movements economical and precise, documenting each one in her waterproof notebook. She was a scientist, and this was data collection. Simple. Logical. But then she felt it. At first, it was just a low thrum, a vibration that seemed to buzz not in the air but in the marrow of her bones. She stopped, her hand hovering over a rare species of fern. What was that? She held her breath, listening. Nothing. Just the gentle sigh of the wind through the pines. She tried to dismiss it. An inner ear issue, a change in barometric pressure. There was always a logical explanation. Always. Despite that, the feeling returned, stronger this time. It wasn't just a vibration anymore, it was a pull. An invisible current in the air, tugging her deeper into the woods, toward the forbidden glade. As if pulled by a string, her head turned. Her eyes scanned the dense wall of ancient trees that marked the glade's perimeter. The air here felt different, thicker, charged with an energy that felt like the moment before a lightning strike. The scent on the air changed, too. Beneath the familiar notes of pine and damp earth was something else, and something wild and musky and utterly alien. It was intoxicating, primal. Her body moved on instinct. She took a step, Then another, her scientific mission momentarily forgotten, replaced by a raw, inexplicable curiosity. The pull intensified with every footstep. Deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't barometric pressure. This wasn't a trick of her mind. This was real, and it was calling to her. What's worse, a part of her, a deep, buried part she didn't recognize, wanted to answer. It was in that moment, as she stood at the precipice of the unknown, that she saw it. Carved into the bark of an ancient, gnarled oak at the glade's entrance was a symbol, a swirling, intricate knot that seemed to pulse with a faint energy of its own. It looked like a wolf. Her breath caught. Without thinking, she reached out, her fingers tracing the strange carving, and felt a jolt, a spark of warmth that shot up her arm. Just like that, the pull became an undeniable summons. She had to know what was in there. That night, sleep offered no escape. It was a restless, tossing and turning affair, the strange energy of the forest clinging to her like a shroud. The cabin, once her sterile sanctuary, now felt like a cage, too small to contain the wild, chaotic feelings the glade had stirred within her. Her thoughts spun, a whirlwind of logic and instinct, of fear and a strange, thrilling anticipation. Could a place have a will of its own? Could a forest call to you? The scientist in her screamed no, but the woman who had felt that energy hum in her bones, she wasn't so sure. What followed was a dream, more vivid and real than any she had ever had. She was standing in a clearing bathed in impossible moonlight. The air was cool and sweet, and at the center of the clearing grew a single flower, its petals the color of the deepest emerald, glowing with a soft, internal light. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She felt a desperate urge to touch it, to see if its light was warm, to pluck it and race back to Alara. She knew, with a certainty that defied all reason, that this flower was the answer. It was the cure. Before she could move, a shadow detached itself from the tree line. It was massive, a creature of midnight and muscle, a wolf. Its fur was the color of a starless night, save for the tips, which gleamed like spun silver in the moonlight. It took a step forward and she saw its eyes. They weren't the flat, animalistic eyes of a normal wolf. They were golden, intelligent, and filled with a shocking, soul-deep loneliness. Her breath caught. There was no fear, not a trace. Instead, a strange sense of recognition washed over her, a feeling of inevitability. The space between them burned. Her chest ached with a longing she couldn't name. The golden eyes held hers, and in their depths she saw not a monster but a protector, a guardian, a king. The moment their eyes locked, something inside her shifted. A warmth bloomed deep in her belly, spreading through her veins like fire. Her soul, a part of her she never knew existed, seemed to answer a question she hadn't heard. The wolf took another step, and the dream world trembled. Her name hung in the air, unspoken but perfectly clear. Seraphina. And just like that, everything changed. She woke with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs. The dream clung to her, the scent of pine and wild musk still faint in the air. The image of those golden eyes burned into the back of her eyelids. The cabin was silent, save for the soft, steady rhythm of Alara's breathing, a sound that was a little stronger today, a little deeper. In the quiet that followed, her decision solidified. The pull, the symbol, the dream. They were all pieces of a puzzle her science couldn't solve. Maybe, just maybe, the answer wasn't on a glass slide. With a newfound, terrifying resolve, she rose from her bed. She didn't know what was waiting for her in the Heartwood Glade, but she knew she had to face it, for Alara, for herself. She packed her field kit, her hands steady, her purpose clear. She was going in. Stepping into the Heartwood Glade was like stepping into another world. The air instantly grew thick, heavy with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and damp ancient earth. It was silent. Too silent. The normal chatter of birds and insects was gone, replaced by a low, resonant hum that vibrated deep in Seraphina's chest. Her world tilted. Sunlight, which had been bright and cheerful moments before, now filtered through the impossibly dense canopy in ethereal, silvery beams, illuminating swirling motes of pollen that danced in the still air. As if the world narrowed, her focus locked onto a path that wasn't there a moment ago, a trail of moss that seemed to glow with a faint, inner light. Her body moved on instinct, following the impossible path. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sacred quiet. With every heartbeat, the pull grew stronger, a siren song leading her to the heart of the mystery. And then she saw it. Just like in her dream, a clearing opened up before her. In the center, bathed in a pool of silver light, was the flower. Its petals were a shade of green so deep and vibrant it seemed to drink the light, glowing from within. It was perfect, impossible. And yet, there it was. For a single, breathtaking moment, her scientific curiosity and the dream's magical promise merged into a feeling of pure, unadulterated hope. This was it. The cure. Before the words left her lips, a shadow detached itself from the trees. He was tall, built with a lean, predatory grace that made the forest seem to bend around him. His hair was as black as a raven's wing, and his clothes were simple, practical. But his eyes, her breath caught. They were golden. The same intelligent, achingly lonely golden eyes from her dream. The moment their eyes locked, the air thickened, crackling with an energy that made the hairs on her arms stand up. Time stood still. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched her, his expression an unreadable mask of shock and something else. Something that looked like a man who had been starving his whole life and had just stumbled upon a feast. Without warning, the world exploded into chaos. Snarling ripped through the sacred silence. From the deep woods, 3 monstrous creatures burst into the clearing. They were wolves, but twisted. Bigger, more savage, their eyes burning with a rabid red light. Terror, cold and absolute, stole her breath. She was frozen, a statue of pure fear. But then, the man moved. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He met the charge head-on. A growl rose in his throat, a sound so deep and guttural it wasn't entirely human. "Run!" he roared, the command a physical blow. But her feet were rooted to the spot. Her mind simply couldn't process the nightmare unfolding before her. Between one breath and the next, his body convulsed. Bones cracked and reformed with sickening speed. His form twisted, expanded, dark fur sprouting from his skin. In the span of a breath, the man was gone. In his place stood the wolf from her dream, a massive black beast with silver-tipped fur and furious blazing golden eyes. He met the rogues in a clash of teeth and claws. It was a maelstrom of violence, a whirlwind of snapping jaws and guttural snarls. Seraphina finally found her legs, stumbling backward, a scream trapped in her throat. One of the red-eyed rogues broke from the fight, its sights set on her. It lunged, a blur of mangy fur and saliva-dripping fangs. She shut her eyes, bracing for the end. Instead, a wall of black fur slammed into the rogue, sending it flying. Her protector, the great black wolf, stood over her, a low, rumbling growl vibrating through the ground. The rogue scrambled to its feet and lunged again, aiming for his unprotected flank. He couldn't turn in time. Without thinking, she screamed his name, a name she didn't know but her soul remembered. Kaelen. Her voice distracted the rogue for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Kaelen whirled, but the second rogue was on him. To save her, he had left himself open. Deep down, she knew the truth. He was going to die for her. As the third rogue charged directly at her, Kaelen did the only thing he could. He lunged, not at the enemy, but at her. His massive jaws opened, and instead of tearing her throat out, he sank his teeth into the soft flesh of her shoulder. Pain, white-hot, blinding, and absolute, erased the world. It was a fire that consumed her, a lightning strike that seared every nerve. But beneath the agony was something else, A flood of raw power, of warmth, of a fierce, possessive energy that poured into her from him. It felt like a claim, a brand, a violation, and she let it happen. His howl of mingled fury and possession was the last thing she heard before her own terror gave her wings. She scrambled to her feet and ran, not looking back, the metallic taste of blood and magic in her mouth. By the time she burst through the cabin door, she was running on pure adrenaline. She slammed the door shut, slid the bolt, and collapsed against it, her body one giant, trembling nerve. The world swam in a haze of pain and disbelief. Her shoulder was on fire, a searing agony that pulsed in time with her frantic heartbeat. She pressed a hand to it, expecting to feel warm, sticky blood. Instead, her fingers met skin that was hot and tight, but unbroken. Impossible. She stumbled to the small bathroom mirror, her whole body shaking. With trembling fingers, she pulled down the collar of her shirt. Her breath caught. There was no gaping wound, no torn flesh. Instead, swirling across her shoulder like a dark, intricate tattoo, was a mark. It looked like the carving on the tree, the swirling, wolf-like knot. But it was etched into her skin, dark and stark against her pale flesh. As she stared, mesmerized and horrified, she could feel it. A faint, warm tingle, a hum of energy that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. It was a part of her now. "Sarah?" The voice, thin and fragile but clear, cut through her shock. Seraphina's head snapped up. Alara's voice hadn't been that strong in years. "Sarah, I'm hungry." Her thoughts spun. She pushed herself away from the door and stumbled into the main room. The sight that greeted her made her world tilt on its axis for the second time that day. Alara was sitting up in bed, sitting up. There was color in her cheeks, a healthy, rosy blush instead of the usual waxy pallor. Her eyes, usually dull with fatigue, were bright and alert. She looked, well. In that moment, the terrifying, agonizing bite in the woods collided with the beautiful, impossible miracle in the bed. Her violation was her sister's cure. The thought was a dizzying, nauseating paradox. How could something so wrong create something so right? A sharp knock on the door made her jump, a strangled cry escaping her lips. "Seraphina!" Her chest ached. It was his voice, the man from the glade. Kaelen. It was a low, rumbling baritone, laced with an urgency that sent a shiver of fear down her spine. "Go away!" she choked out, her voice trembling. "Please," he said, and the word was full of a rough, raw pleading that she didn't expect. "I won't hurt you. I need to explain. You're in danger." "You did hurt me," she sobbed, one hand protectively clutching her marked shoulder. "I know." The voice came, softer now, laced with a regret so profound it seeped through the thick wood of the door. "I had to. It was the only way to save you, and to link you to my life force, to protect you." Before she could process that, Alara spoke again, her voice even stronger. "Sarah, who is that? Is everything okay?" That was it. That was the choice. Her fear of the monster outside versus the living, breathing proof of the miracle he had wrought. With a deep, shuddering breath, she slid the bolt. He stood on her porch, no longer a beast but a man, his tall frame filling the doorway. His golden eyes, filled with a storm of guilt and concern, locked onto hers. And she felt it, clear as day. A pull, a connection, a hum that seemed to sing from the mark on her shoulder directly to him. The space between them burned, and just like that, she knew her old life was over. "They'll be able to scent you now," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the small cabin. He hadn't stepped inside, hadn't crossed the threshold. He stood on the porch, a caged predator holding himself in check by a thread of sheer will. The mark. It announces you to my kind. It declares you as mine. "Yours?" Her voice trembled, a mix of fury and fear. "I am not a piece of property. You can't just—" "I know." He cut her off, his golden eyes flashing with frustration. It wasn't a choice, it was an instinct, a desperate one, to protect you. The rogues that attacked us, they weren't just random beasts. They were hunting. Hunting what? She whispered, though deep down she already felt the chilling answer. You, he said, and the single word landed with the weight of a death sentence. And now that you're marked, their leader will be even more desperate to get to you, which meant I had to make a choice. Seraphina stared at him, her mind struggling to keep up. Rogues, hunts, marks. It was the language of a dark fairy tale, yet the living proof was sitting up in the next room, humming a little tune. The paradox was tearing her apart. My sister, she began, her voice barely audible. How? The mark connected you to me, to my alpha life force, he explained, his gaze softening with something that looked like awe. That power flowed through you, and into her. It's fighting the darkness that's been poisoning her. He took a half step forward, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. But it's a temporary fix. My proximity, the strength of the bond. It's what's keeping her stable. If I leave, if they get to you. He didn't have to finish. The silence roared. The stakes were laid bare, cruel and simple. Her freedom, her safety, her understanding of the world, all of it weighed against Alara's life. It wasn't a choice at all. It was a cage. So, she had to go with him. She had to trust the monster who had branded her. She had to step into his world of violence and myth because it was the only path to keeping her sister alive. Okay, she said, the word feeling like sand in her mouth. I'll go. Relief, so profound it seemed to physically alter him, washed over his features. The tension in his shoulders eased, and he finally met her eyes without the weight of the world in them. Thank you. The journey was a blur of tense silence. She packed a single bag, her hands moving on autopilot. Leaving the cabin, her sterile sanctuary, felt like shedding a skin. She locked the door behind her, the click of the bolt sounding like a final goodbye to the woman she used to be. The truck he drove was big and dark, and the silence inside was thick with unspoken questions and primal fear. She sat rigid, staring out the window, acutely aware of his presence beside her. The scent of pine and something wild, the scent from her dream, clung to him, a constant reminder of what he was. Eventually, they turned off the main road and onto a hidden dirt track. The forest grew thicker, the trees older, their branches weaving a canopy overhead that plunged the path into a deep green twilight. Minutes later, the woods opened into a vast clearing. Her breath caught. It wasn't a den or a cave. It was a town. A hidden community of rustic, sturdy-looking log houses, smoke curling from stone chimneys. People moved through the streets, their clothes modern, but their movements held a certain wild grace. As they drove down the main path, people stopped to stare. She saw their eyes, catching the light, flash with colors that weren't quite human. Yellows, golds, greens. Her world tilted again. They parked in front of the largest building, a lodge-like structure that seemed to grow out of the earth itself. Kaelen killed the engine, and in the sudden silence, she could feel it. Dozens of heartbeats, dozens of pairs of eyes, all focused on her. The mark on her shoulder pulsed with a sudden, intense heat. She had crossed the threshold. This was her new reality, and she was the only human in a town full of wolves. The moment she stepped out of the truck, she felt them. Eyes, dozens of them. She was a specimen on a slide, and the entire town was looking through the microscope. Her instincts screamed at her to shrink back, to become invisible, but her pride wouldn't let her. So she lifted her chin and met their stares, her heart a frantic bird beating against the cage of her ribs. The town itself was a paradox. The log buildings were masterfully constructed, the layout of the streets logical and efficient. a fact her analytical mind latched onto with desperate relief. But the scents. Oh, the scents were chaos. Wood smoke and roasting meat warred with the dizzying individual musk of each person, each wolf, a primal perfume that spoke of power and wildness. Kaelen placed a hand on the small of her back, a gesture that was likely meant to be reassuring but instead sent a jolt of fire through her. "This way," he murmured, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. He led her into the largest lodge. Instead of the dark, primitive den she'd expected, it was a great hall, warm and filled with the low murmur of conversation. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the air smelled of burning oak and something sweet, like cinnamon. A woman sat in a high-backed chair near the fire, and as they approached, the conversations around them died. She looked ageless. Her long silver hair was woven into an intricate braid, and her face was a beautiful map of fine lines. But her eyes were a pale, startling blue, and they saw everything. They weren't the eyes of an old woman. They were ancient, sharp, and they pinned Seraphina in place. This had to be Elder Lyra. "Leave us," Lyra said, her voice soft but carrying an undeniable authority. Without another word, Kaelen and everyone else in the hall retreated, leaving Seraphina alone with the elder. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, Lyra spoke. "You have your mother's stubborn chin, and your grandmother's eyes." Seraphina blinked. "You knew them." "I knew of them. Of your line." Lyra's gaze drifted to Seraphina's shoulder, as if she could see the mark through the fabric of her shirt. "The world has more layers than your science can measure, child. Your sister's illness is not a sickness of the body. It is a sickness of the soul. A curse laid upon your bloodline generations ago by a man whose greed and cruelty echoed in his own descendants." "A curse?" Seraphina's voice was thin. "That's impossible. We've done every genetic test." "You were searching for a broken code in a book written in a language you don't believe exists," Lyra interrupted gently. "You, Seraphina, are the last of the Earth Witches. A lineage of women with a deep, primal connection to the life force of the world. The curse was designed to sever that connection, to make it curdle and turn inward, poisoning the host. It was a slow, wasting death." Her thoughts spun. Witch? Curse? It was absurd. A convenient fantasy to explain away the horrors she'd witnessed. "And let me guess," she said, her voice dripping with a sarcasm she couldn't contain. "This mark is the magic key?" Lyra smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "The bite of a true alpha, given to his fated mate, is a conduit of immense life force. My grandson did not know what you were. He acted on pure instinct to save you. But in doing so, as if fate demanded it, his power shattered the curse's hold and jump-started the magic sleeping in your blood." Seraphina just stared, her mind a whirlwind of rejection. This was a trick, a manipulation. They were feeding her this folklore to control her. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, I am a botanist. I believe in evidence, in facts, not in fairy tales." "Do you?" Lyra asked softly. "Then what fact explains the miracle happening in your sister's body right now?" The question struck home, a physical blow. Before she could answer, a surge of pure, helpless fury washed through her. Fury at this woman, at Kaelen, at this impossible situation. She clenched her fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. "Science will explain it," she bit out. "There's a reason. There is always a—" She stopped. A faint, dry, crackling sound drew her eyes. On a small table beside Lyra's chair sat a lush green fern. Or, it had been a lush green fern. As she watched, the fronds curled, turned a sickly brown, and crumbled into fine gray dust. In the span of a breath, it was dead, utterly lifeless. The silence that followed was absolute. Lyra's ancient, knowing eyes met hers, and for the first time in her life, Seraphina had no logical explanation at all. She was given a room. It was simple, comfortable, with a window that looked out over the bustling settlement. But it felt like a prison cell. She spent the first hour pacing, her mind racing, trying to deconstruct the impossible things she had witnessed. Her emotions had killed a plant. The thought was insane, a complete departure from every law of nature she had dedicated her life to studying. Truth be told, a part of her was terrified. She stared at her hands, turning them over and over. Were they weapons now? Was she some kind of freak? The scientist in her, battered and bruised, clung to one last sliver of sanity. Observation. If she couldn't disprove it, she would study it. The anomaly was no longer the world around her. The anomaly was her. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, and her heart leaped. It was Alara. She answered the video call, her breath catching in her throat. Her sister's face filled the screen, bright and animated. She was laughing, telling a story about a nurse who'd brought her a chocolate pudding cup. The sound of that laugh, so full of life, was a balm to Seraphina's frayed soul. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy and relief washed over her, so potent it made her dizzy. "Oh, Alara," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "It's so good to hear you." "I feel good, Sarah. I feel like myself again." They talked for 20 minutes, and with every passing second, the cold knot of fear in Seraphina's chest loosened. After she hung up, she felt lighter than she had in years. She turned from the phone, her gaze falling on the small, dusty pot on her windowsill where the fern had died, and she froze. From the center of the dry, dead soil, a single tiny leaf was unfurling. It was a perfect, vibrant emerald green, glistening with life. Her anger had killed it. Her joy had brought it back. Cause, effect. The evidence was irrefutable. And just like that, everything she thought she knew crumbled to dust, just like the dead fern. A soft knock came at the door. Moments later, Kaelen entered, not with the force of an alpha, but with a quiet hesitation. He held a wooden tray with a steaming bowl of stew and a piece of bread. He said nothing, simply set it down on a small table. The space between them was charged, but the terror she'd felt before was muted, replaced by a confusing storm of other emotions. "How did you know?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. "About what I was?" "I didn't," he admitted, his golden eyes filled with a strange vulnerability. "When I saw you in the glade, it was like the world shifted into focus for the first time. My wolf, my soul, it just knew. Mate. That was the only thought in my head. Everything else was instinct." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of pure frustration. "I'm the alpha. I'm supposed to be in control. But around you, it's a battle I keep losing." His honesty disarmed her. For the first time, she saw past the wolf, past the alpha, and saw the man. A man burdened by a weight she couldn't imagine. He was a paradox, a creature of primal instinct and profound duty. Before either could speak again, a deep, resonant horn blast echoed through the valley. Kaelen stiffened, his entire demeanor changing in an instant. The vulnerable man was gone, replaced by the alpha. The air thickened with tension. "What is that?" she asked, her pulse racing. "Patrol," he growled, his eyes already distant, focused on the danger. "They're back early." He moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. "Stay here. Lock this door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Lyra." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the scent of stew, a single impossible green leaf and the chilling sound of an alarm. The controlled hum of the settlement dissolved into organized chaos. Through her window, Seraphina watched as shifters moved with a fluid, predatory purpose, their faces grim. The peaceful town she had seen upon arrival was a facade. Beneath it was a warrior pack ready for battle at a moment's notice. The front doors of the lodge burst open, and her stomach clenched. They were carrying the wounded. The scent of blood, sharp and metallic, drifted even to her second-story room. She saw deep gashes, broken limbs. She saw the pain on their faces and the fierce, protective anger on the faces of those who helped them. A profound, crushing guilt washed over her. These people were bleeding. These people were hurting, and it was because of her. Her problem had followed her here and had become a poison infecting all of them. She felt trapped, useless. She was a scientist without a lab, a healer whose only cure was the source of the danger. She paced the room, her mind a frantic mess, until Lyra appeared at her door hours later. The elder's face was etched with weariness, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "The attacks grow bolder," Lyra said without preamble. "Merrick is no longer just testing our borders. He's trying to bleed us, to weaken us before he makes his real move." "For me," Seraphina whispered, the words tasting like ash. "For the power you carry," Lyra corrected gently. "To him, you are not a person. You are a key." Just then, a commotion from the great hall below drew their attention. Two large shifters were dragging a struggling, snarling rogue through the main doors. He was bound in thick, silver-laced ropes that seemed to burn his skin, but he fought like a cornered animal. Kaelen met them, his face a mask of cold fury. From the top of the stairs, Seraphina could see the rogue clearly. His eyes were wild, rabid, the same terrifying red she remembered from the glade. He thrashed against his bonds, spitting and cursing. Then, his frantic gaze swept the room and landed on her. He froze. A slow, greedy smile stretched across his blood-flecked lips. A chilling, proprietary light entered his eyes, as if he were a butcher sizing up a prize cut of meat. The tension broke. He threw his head back and laughed, a ragged, unhinged sound. "There she is!" he howled, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent hall. His red eyes locked with hers, and he inhaled deeply, as if tasting her on the air. "The bloom! Oh, he will be so pleased. Merrick will drain you dry, little witch. He'll drink your magic and leave you a husk." The words, a promise of utter annihilation, hung in the air. Kaelen silenced him with a single brutal blow, but it was too late. Seraphina stood frozen at the top of the stairs, the rogue's venomous promise echoing in her ears. She wasn't just a target. She wasn't just a key. She was a harvest. And the reaping had begun. The words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the great hall. "Drain you dry. Leave you a husk." Seraphina stood frozen at the top of the stairs, the rogue's venomous promise coiling in her gut like a cold serpent. Before, the danger had been an abstract concept, a threat of capture or death. But this was a promise of annihilation, of being consumed, erased. The cold, analytical part of her brain, the part that had been her shield for so long, was finally overwhelmed by a wave of pure, primal terror. Her breath hitched. She was a liability, a walking, breathing catastrophe for every person in this settlement. That's why her old goal, to simply survive this nightmare long enough to escape, crumbled into dust. There was no escape from this. There was no running from a predator who wanted to devour her very essence. In that moment, something inside her shifted. The fear didn't vanish, but something new rose up to meet it. A cold, hard spike of defiance. If she was going to be a prize in this monstrous war, she would not be a passive one. Without thinking, her feet carried her down the stairs, her eyes locked on Kaelen as he turned from the now unconscious rogue. He saw her approaching, and the fury in his eyes was instantly banked by a wave of concern. "Seraphina, you should be in your room." "No," she cut him off, her voice low and tight, but clear. It didn't tremble. "I am done hiding. I'm done being the reason your people are bleeding. The rogue was right, wasn't he? As long as I'm like this, I'm just a target. My job is to protect that target," he growled, his protective instinct a tangible force in the air between them. "My pack's job is to protect you. That is the only way." "And how is that working out?" She shot back. gesturing to the wounded being tended to near the fire. Your way means you all bleed for me until Merrick finally breaks through and I get everyone killed. That is not a plan. It's a slow death sentence. Her chest ached with a terrifying certainty. There is only one way forward. You have to teach me. Teach me to control this magic inside me. I will not be a victim in this story. I have to fight. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering along his cheek. Absolutely not. I will not train you for a war you should never have to fight. I brought you here to keep you safe. And I am telling you that you can't. Her voice rose, laced with a desperation that was almost frantic. Don't you see? Your pack is getting hurt because I am a liability. The only way to change the equation is to make me an asset. The boy is blinded by his heart, child. Lyra's calm voice cut through their heated standoff. The elder approached them, her ancient eyes fixed on her grandson. But she is right. A witch who cannot control her power is a danger to everyone, most of all herself. Her fear and anger are weapons without a master. You cannot shield her from what she is, Kaelen. You can only help her wield it. Kaelen looked from his grandmother's unyielding face to Seraphina's desperate, defiant one. The battle in his eyes was fierce, the alpha's duty warring with the mate's instinct to protect at all costs. Finally, with a low growl of frustration that was more resignation than anger, he gave a sharp, reluctant nod. Moments later, she stood with Lyra in a quiet, secluded garden behind the lodge. The air was cool and the scent of damp earth was a comforting balm. Magic is not a tool you pick up, Lyra said softly. It is a current you join. It is the life that flows through root and stone and water. Close your eyes. Feel it. Seraphina did as she was told. She closed her eyes and reached out. With her mind. She tried to catalog the sensations, to analyze the flow of energy, to find a logical system. But there was nothing. Just dirt and leaves and the frustrating, maddening silence of a world that refused to speak a language she could understand. She opened her eyes, the failure a bitter taste in her mouth. Weeks passed. Frustration became her constant companion. She had learned that her power was tied to her emotions, a wild, unpredictable beast. A surge of happiness when Alara sent a video of herself walking in the hospital garden made a dormant rosebush outside her window explode with blossoms. A flash of anger when she overheard two pack members whispering about the dangerous human caused every glass of water in the great hall to ripple. But conscious control? It was impossible. She was a weapon that fired at random, and her resolve was beginning to fray. She found Lyra by the hearth, the firelight dancing across her wise, patient face. I can't do it, Seraphina said, the admission a painful defeat. I keep trying to command it, and nothing happens. Lyra looked up, her pale eyes seeming to see right through to Seraphina's soul. That is because you are trying to command the earth like a machine, and it is not a machine. Magic is not an equation to be solved, child. It is a relationship to be nurtured. The elder leaned forward, her voice dropping. You must understand what you are fighting. Merrick doesn't just want to steal your power. He wants to corrupt it. He seeks to perform a blood ritual to invert the life-giving magic of an earth witch and fuse it with the predatory dominance of an alpha. He wants to become an alpha witch, a god of life and death in his own twisted mind. As if the forest watched, a sudden unnatural chill swept through the lodge. The fire in the hearth sputtered, its flames turning a sickly greenish black. Outside, a wave of palpable wrongness washed over the settlement. A wave of sickness, of pain. Her breath caught. She could feel it, a sour, agonizing cry from the forest itself. Without a word, Kaelen was at her side, his hand on her arm, his golden eyes blazing. What is it? He demanded. The forest, she whispered, her own body aching in sympathy. It's crying. Panic erupted outside, shouts, snarls, but not the sounds of a direct attack. It was confusion, paranoia. Kaelen raced to the door and flung it open. Seraphina followed, her heart pounding. The world outside was warped. The very air shimmered with a dark, oily magic. Two pack members were circling each other, growling, their eyes glazed over with illusion. They saw enemies where brothers stood. It was a psychological assault, an attack designed to turn them on themselves. Blood magic, Lyra hissed, her face a grim mask, a poison of the mind and of the land. The elder's ancient eyes found Seraphina's, and the look in them was filled with a sudden, tragic urgency. There is something else you must know, the reason he is so powerful, the reason he can do this. What is it? Seraphina pleaded, her voice trembling as she felt the land's agony intensify. The curse on your family. It was not just to sever your magic. That was only the first part of its design. Lyra's voice was heavy with the weight of a terrible secret. It was also meant to gather, with every generation, the dormant life force, the magic that should have been used, was instead stored, contained, and concentrated. It has been accumulating for 200 years. Her gaze was filled with a terrible pity. It has all been gathered. In you. Her world tilted. The air rushed from her lungs. He is not just hunting you for your power, child, Lyra finished, her voice a death knell. He is hunting you because your bloodline has been unwillingly preparing this sacrifice for him for centuries. You are not just the key. You are the culmination. The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. The illusions outside faded as Merrick's magic receded, leaving the pack shaken and a swath of the nearby forest blighted and gray. But Seraphina barely noticed. She stood there, frozen, the weight of generations, of all her stolen ancestors, crashing down upon her. This wasn't her fight alone. It never had been. She was the last soldier in a war she was born to lose. In the quiet that followed, the mood over the settlement was grim. The pack was shaken, not by wounds to their bodies, but by the violation of their minds. Merrick had turned their greatest strength, their pack bond, against them. But for Seraphina, the fear and the shock were already crystallizing into something else, something cold and hard and clear. Vengeance. Her goal was no longer simply control. It was mastery. She walked to the edge of the blighted forest. The very air here was sour, the ground gray and cracked. The trees were skeletal, their leaves withered husks. It was an affront, a wound upon the world that she felt in her own soul. The fight was no longer about her survival. It was about avenging the stolen lives of every witch in her family line. Kaelen found her there. He didn't speak for a long time, just stood beside her, his presence a solid, grounding weight in her chaotic world. She could feel him watching her, his golden eyes tracing her profile. The silence stretched, filled only by the whisper of a sickened wind. I was wrong, he said finally, his voice a low rumble. The admission seemed to cost him something. All this time I was trying to protect the terrified woman I found in the woods. But that's not who you are anymore, is it? She shook her head, her eyes never leaving the dead trees. She doesn't exist anymore. Your Mark, Merrick, you both burned her away. He took a step closer, the space between them humming with a new kind of energy. It wasn't just the mate bond anymore. It was the respect of one warrior for another. I see that now. I cannot shield you from this fight. I can only stand with you in it. He waited a beat. Tell me what you need. We do this together. The words, we do this together, struck a chord deep inside her. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't entirely alone. She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and saw not the alpha, not the wolf, but her partner, her ally. A flicker of an idea, born from Lyra's words, sparked in her mind. It is a relationship. She knelt down, pressing her palm flat against the cold, sickened earth. The scientist in her was quiet at last. She didn't try to analyze, command, or control. She closed her eyes. And for the first time, she just listened. At first, there was nothing, only cold, dead silence. She pushed past the emptiness, reaching deeper, not with her mind, but with her heart, with the blood of the ancestors singing faintly in her veins. And then she felt it, faint, thready, a weak, desperate pulse deep beneath the earth, the dying heartbeat of the forest. It was a start, and as her own heart answered its call, a single terrifying question echoed in the stillness. Could she learn to heal this land? To wield a power centuries in the making? Fast enough to win a war that was already lost? She knelt on the cold, dead earth, her palm pressed flat against the cracked soil. Kaelen stood behind her, a silent, solid mountain of warmth and presence. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of the power humming inside her. She was reaching for it. She closed her eyes and listened, not with her ears, but with her soul, searching for that faint, thready pulse of the dying forest. There. It was weak, a mere whisper of life. But it was there. And because she could feel it, she knew it wasn't truly dead. Hope, fierce and sharp, bloomed in her chest. What followed were days of grueling, frustrating, exhilarating work. The garden behind the lodge became her training ground, her laboratory. At first, she repeated her failures, trying to force the life force to move, to obey her commands. It was like trying to cup water in a clenched fist. "You're thinking too hard," Kaelen's voice rumbled from beside her one afternoon. He had become her shadow, her anchor. "You're trying to map it. Just feel it." "I don't know how to just feel it," she retorted, her frustration boiling over. "My entire life has been about mapping things, about understanding systems." And just like that, everything clicked. Her body moved on instinct. "That's it," she whispered, her eyes widening. "Kaelen, you're a genius." Before he could react, she grabbed his hand, her touch sending a jolt between them. "Don't think of me as a witch. Think of me as a biologist. Magic isn't just a vague life force. It's a system. It must have pathways, a vascular network, a root structure." She closed her eyes again, but this time she wasn't listening for a feeling. She was visualizing a system. She pictured the life energy of the healthy forest like the circulatory system in a body, a network of bright, glowing green vessels. Then she pictured the blighted land as a limb with a tourniquet around it, the life flow cut off. Her job wasn't to command it. Her job was to perform surgery, to create a bypass. She focused on a single dead sapling a few feet away. She reached out, not with force, but with a gentle, persuasive touch, visualizing a tiny, glowing green thread of energy branching off from the main, healthy network. She saw it nudging its way through the sickened soil, a delicate, persistent tendril of life. She guided it, nurtured it, coaxed it toward the sapling's dead roots. The air thickened. The mark on her shoulder grew warm. Kaelen's hand tightened on her shoulder, his own energy a steadying presence. A beat later, a collective gasp went through the small group of pack members watching from a distance. Seraphina opened her eyes. On one of the sapling's brittle gray branches, a single, perfect emerald green leaf had unfurled. It was small, it was fragile, but it was alive. A triumphant, breathless laugh escaped her lips. It was proof. Not just that she could do this, but that her scientific mind wasn't a liability to her magic. It was the key to unlocking it. In that moment, as Kaelen's proud, wondering gaze met hers, she felt the first stirrings of a power she could truly call her own. But she also knew, with a chilling certainty, that this small act of healing was a flare, shot up in the darkness for a hungry predator to see. Energized by the breakthrough, they decided to take a greater risk. They had to. Merrick's poison was still spreading, a slow, creeping plague on the land. Lyra identified the heart of the blight, a corrupted clearing where the blood magic was most concentrated. "It's a nexus," she'd explained, her face grim. "Heal the heart, and the limbs may yet be saved." So, They went. Kaelen, along with 5 of his best warriors, formed a silent, lethal perimeter around the clearing. They moved with a wolf's grace, their eyes scanning the oppressive gray woods. The clearing itself felt like a wound. The air was cold and smelled of rot and old blood. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It was dead. Seraphina walked to the center and knelt. "Stay close," Kaelen's voice came, a low growl in her ear from his position just inside the tree line. "I am right here." His words were an anchor in the sea of decay. She pressed her palms to the corrupted earth and closed her eyes, diving into the network of life. This time, she didn't just nudge a single thread, she gathered a river. She pulled on the vast, vibrant energy of the healthy forest, becoming a conduit, a living channel for the planet's own will to heal. The ground beneath her hands began to warm. The air stirred. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, a low hum filled the clearing. It was working. Through her closed eyelids, she could sense the light changing as gray gave way to green. The scent of rot was being replaced by the smell of fresh, damp earth. It was the most exhilarating, most powerful moment of her life. So much life in one little vessel. The voice was a rasp of dry leaves in her mind. It was not her own. It was not Kaelen's. It was cold, ancient, and filled with a bottomless hunger. Merrick. Her concentration shattered. The river of energy faltered. "Did you enjoy his bite, little witch?" The voice sneered, a poison seeping directly into her thoughts. Suddenly, she wasn't in the clearing anymore. She was back in the glade, the memory of his teeth sinking into her shoulder as sharp and agonizing as the real thing. The pain, the violation, the terror. Merrick was force-feeding it to her. He branded you, marked you like cattle. And you kneel at his feet and call it love? A scream built in her throat. The healing stalled, the green shoots faltering. "Seraphina!" Kaelen's roar cut through the illusion. It was raw, furious, and filled with a desperate plea. He couldn't fight the enemy in her head. Only she could. Her world tilted. She fought against the tide of manufactured terror, clinging to Kaelen's voice. She remembered his vulnerability, his quiet support, the look of awe in his eyes when she healed the sapling. That was real, not this twisted phantom Merrick was creating. The mark was not an ending, she thought, her own resolve a shield against the poison. It was a beginning. With a furious mental shove, she pushed Merrick's voice out. She seized control of the river of life force once more and unleashed it in a single defiant wave. A pulse of brilliant green light erupted from her, washing over the clearing, scouring away the last of the blight. The dead silence was replaced by the hum of vibrant life. It was a staggering victory. The moment the power receded, her strength gave out, and she collapsed, caught just in time by Kaelen, who was at her side in a heartbeat. He held her close, his heart hammering against her back. They had done it. They had struck a real blow against him. But as he held her, both of them knew with a chilling certainty that this was not the end. It was a declaration of war, and Merrick's reprisal would be swift and terrible. In the quiet that followed, she recovered in the lodge, her body weak but her spirit forged into something new, something harder. The pack celebrated the victory, the healing of the forest, a powerful symbol of hope. For the first time, they looked at her not with suspicion, but with a tentative, growing respect. She was not the human victim. She was their witch. Kaelen rarely left her side. The near disaster in the clearing had stripped away the last of their pretenses. The emotional walls had crumbled, leaving something raw and real in their place. That evening, as she sat by the fire, he knelt before her, taking her hand in his. His touch was gentle, reverent. "When he was in your head," Kaelen's voice was rough with emotion, "I felt your terror through the bond, and I have never, in all my life, felt so helpless, or so full of rage." He looked up, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that took her breath away. "I would burn the world to the ground before I let him harm you, Seraphina. You are not just my mate. You are the other half of my soul." Her heart skipped. The truth of his words resonated in the mark on her shoulder, a warm, steady pulse. "I was so scared," she confessed, her voice a whisper. "He used the memory of the marking." "And you fought him off," he finished, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "You chose to trust what we have now over the pain of how we began." Her world narrowed to the space between them. Before either could speak, she leaned in, and he met her halfway. The kiss was not a thing of desperate instinct or chaotic passion. It was a conscious choice. It was slow and deep, and full of a profound, soul-shattering tenderness. It was a promise. It was an acceptance. It was the sealing of a bond that had been forged in violence but was now tempered in love and mutual respect. When they finally broke apart, the future felt, for the first time, like something they would build together. The great hall doors burst open with a crash, shattering the moment. A man, human and trembling with a terror so profound he could barely stand, stumbled inside, his eyes wild. He was flanked by 2 pack warriors who had intercepted him at the border. "A message," the man stammered, his eyes darting around the hall of silent, watching wolves before landing on Kaelen. A message from a man named Merrick. Kaelen was on his feet in an instant, every line of his body radiating lethal authority. "What is the message?" The man swallowed hard, his gaze shifting to Seraphina. A terrible, chilling pity filled his eyes. "He has your sister." The 4 words struck her with the force of a physical blow. The warmth of the kiss turned to ice in her veins. "He took her from the hospital," the man choked out, reciting the words as if by rote. "He says he will keep her safe. For now. He wants a trade, her life, for the witch." The world fell away. The faces around her blurred. All she could see was Alara's smiling face on the phone screen. All she could hear was Merrick's promise to leave her a husk. Her past, the reason she had started this entire journey, was now a weapon aimed directly at her heart. Give herself up and save Alara, but doom this pack and hand Merrick his ultimate prize. Refuse, and her sister would pay the price. Kaelen's hand clamped down on her shoulder, a desperate, anchoring weight. But it couldn't stop her from falling into the abyss. There were no good choices left. There was no turning back. There was only the agony of an impossible decision. Her world, which had just begun to open up with the warmth of a shared kiss and the promise of a shared future, snapped shut like a steel trap. "He has your sister." The words echoed in the stunned silence of the great hall. Every eye was on her, on Kaelen. She could feel their pity, their fear, their unspoken questions. What would she do? What would the Alpha command? In the span of a breath, the fragile peace they had won was shattered, replaced by the jagged edges of an impossible choice. Kaelen's voice was a low, lethal growl that cut through the tension. "No," he said, the word an iron wall. "We do not trade with monsters. We do not negotiate. We will find her. We will bring her home." His decision was absolute, the Alpha's decree. He was already moving, his mind shifting to strategy, to war, his warriors gathering around him. But Seraphina's blood ran cold. She saw the flaw in his plan with horrifying clarity. Kaelen saw a hostage to be rescued. She saw a piece in a game played by a master of cruelty. Merrick wasn't a simple beast. He was a sadist. He was counting on a direct assault. He would have traps. And deep down, she knew the truth. The moment Kaelen's warriors attacked, Merrick would kill Alara without a second thought, if only for the pleasure of watching them fail. Her chest ached. A new, terrifying plan began to form in her mind, a desperate gambit born of love and guilt. She couldn't tell Kaelen. He, in his fierce, noble rage, would never allow it. His love for her made him predictable, and Merrick would use that predictability against him, which meant she had to lie. Moments later, she found him in the strategy room, Maps spread across a massive oak table. She placed a hand on his arm, forcing her face into a mask of resolve. "You're right," she said, the lie tasting like poison on her tongue. "We fight. We get her back. What's the plan?" Relief washed over his face, so pure and total it was like a physical blow. He pulled her into a fierce embrace. "We'll get her back, Seraphina. I swear it." The trust in his eyes was a knife in her heart. He began to outline the strategy, a full-scale assault on Merrick's suspected stronghold at dawn. She nodded, asked questions, played the part of the loyal mate. But her mind was miles away, finalizing the details of her own secret, suicidal mission. That night, she slipped through the sleeping settlement like a ghost. She had convinced a young, guilt-ridden warrior that she was just going to the garden for a moment of peace, a lie he had accepted because the alpha's mate was grieving. She left a note for Kaelen on her pillow, a few hastily scribbled words of love and apology that felt like a pathetic betrayal. She was going to pretend to surrender. She would walk into the lion's den and, using the element of surprise, she would unleash every bit of power she had. She would create chaos, a diversion so complete that it would give Kaelen's forces the opening they needed, and hopefully, give her a chance to grab Alara. It was a terrible plan. It was the only one she had. As she melted into the darkness of the forest, alone and terrified, she repeated the justification over and over. It's the only way to save them all. The meeting point was a place the locals called the Gray Quarry, a desolate man-made scar on the earth. The air was dead here, choked with dust, and the ground was barren rock and gravel. When Seraphina stepped into the vast, empty pit, she felt her connection to the life force of the forest sever as if cut by a knife. A cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. Merrick was waiting for her in the center, a silhouette against the pale moonlight. And beside him, held by two of his hulking rogues, was Alara. Her sister's eyes were wide with terror, a fresh wave of tears spilling down her pale cheeks when she saw Seraphina. "Sarah, no! Run!" Alara cried, her voice hoarse. An admirable display of sisterly affection. Merrick drawled, his voice a smooth, cultured purr that made Seraphina's skin crawl. He was handsome, in a sharp, predatory way, but his eyes were empty voids. "You came alone. I'm impressed. I truly am." "Let her go," Seraphina said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You have me. This was the deal." Merrick smiled, a slow, cruel curving of his lips. "Oh, I will. But first, a demonstration. Show me the power that healed the blight. Show me what you can do." This was it. Her chance. She focused, planting her feet, reaching for the power she had commanded in the forest. She pictured the network, the living veins of magic, and tried to summon them to make the very rock beneath their feet rise up and ensnare him. She pushed, she pulled, she pleaded. Nothing. The ground remained cold, dead, and utterly silent. Her power had no purchase here. There was no life to command. Merrick's laugh was a low, chilling sound that echoed off the quarry walls. "Did you really think I would make it so simple?" he mocked, his eyes dancing with amusement. "Did you think I would meet you in a garden? I chose this place because it is dead, a place where an earth witch is just a woman. A very foolish, very predictable woman. Her blood ran cold. It was a trap. The entire thing was a trap. I didn't just want your power, little witch," he continued, savoring every word. "I wanted your hope. I wanted you to walk in here, full of a desperate, heroic plan, and I wanted to watch it die in your eyes." He took a step closer, his scent, a smell of cold stone and dried blood, assaulting her senses. "And you gave me everything I wanted." As if summoned, a chorus of howls erupted from the rim of the quarry. Kaelen. He'd found her note. He had come. His warriors poured over the edge, a wave of dark, furious shapes, but they were met by twice their number. Merrick's rogues, hidden in the shadows, rose up to meet them. The quarry exploded into a maelstrom of claws and teeth. Kaelen, in his massive wolf form, ignored the battle, his golden eyes locked on Seraphina. He charged, a black thunderbolt of pure rage. But Merrick was ready. He simply smiled and held a silver knife to Alara's throat. Kaelen skidded to a halt, a pained, desperate whine tearing from his throat. He was trapped, forced to hesitate, and in that moment, Merrick's warriors were on him. The battle was a blur of brutal, desperate violence. Seraphina watched in horror as Kaelen's pack was overwhelmed. It had been an ambush from the start. Her reckless plan hadn't created a diversion. It had led her mate and his most loyal warriors directly into a slaughterhouse. Guilt, so sharp and profound it was a physical agony, clawed at her throat. This was her fault. All of it. Kaelen fought like a demigod of fury. He threw off Merrick's warriors, his jaws snapping, his claws tearing through them. He was a force of nature, driven by a love so powerful it was terrifying to behold. He was almost to her, almost to Alara, his eyes blazing with a promise of rescue. But Merrick was a patient predator. He sidestepped, using Alara as a human shield, and as Kaelen was forced to swerve to avoid hitting her, Merrick struck. He didn't use a weapon. He used his own claws, laced with a black, viscous magic, and raked them across Kaelen's side. It wasn't a killing blow. It was something worse. A howl of pure, unadulterated agony ripped through the quarry as the poison magic took hold. Kaelen stumbled, his massive form shuddering. The strength seemed to drain from his limbs, his charge faltering. He collapsed onto the gravel, shifting back into his human form, a deep, bleeding wound weeping black smoke on his side. He was alive, but he was defeated. Captured. And just like that, the last ember of hope inside Seraphina died. Her plan hadn't just failed. It had led to a catastrophe far worse than anything she could have imagined. Merrick had her. He had her sister. And now he had her mate, bleeding and broken at her feet. She had tried to be the hero, to carry the burden alone, and her arrogance, her lie, had doomed them all. The fighting stopped. The surviving pack members were rounded up, disarmed. The quarry fell silent, filled only with the sounds of the wounded and the soft, terrified sobs of her sister. Merrick strode toward her, his victory absolute. He crouched down, grabbing a fistful of her hair and forcing her to look at the devastation she had caused. At Kaelen gasping for breath on the ground, at Alara pale with terror, at the bodies of the wolves who had died trying to save her. All of this, Merrick whispered, his voice a triumphant, venomous caress against her ear. Because you thought you could outsmart me. He pulled her to her feet, his grip like iron. There was no fight left in her. There was nothing. Only a vast, empty cavern of despair. Now, he murmured, his breath hot against her skin as he savored his victory. The harvest can begin. The world was a cage of cold stone and colder despair. Merrick had thrown her into a dark, damp cell deep within his stronghold, a place that felt like a tomb. The air was stale, and the earth here was deaf, dumb, and blind. There was no life to call upon, no magic to wield. There was only the crushing, suffocating weight of her failure. She replayed it over and over in her mind, the lie she'd told Kaelen, the arrogant belief that she could handle a monster like Merrick on her own. The sight of Kaelen collapsing, his blood staining the gray dust of the quarry. Each memory was a fresh turn of the knife. This was her fault. Her arrogance had led them here. Her pride had broken them. A dark, insidious part of her whispered that she deserved this, that this was her penance. Hours or maybe days bled into one another. The darkness was absolute until the heavy door scraped open. Merrick stood there, silhouetted by the torchlight behind him. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at someone his guards were dragging past her cell, Kaelen. He was pale, chained, the wound on his side seeping a black, sluggish poison. He could barely stand. But as they dragged him past, he lifted his head, and his golden eyes found hers through the gloom. She expected to see anger, accusation, blame. Instead, all she saw was a fierce, unwavering, unconditional love. The air thickened. He couldn't speak, but she felt his voice inside her head, a faint, ragged whisper pushed through the mate bond. Not your fault. And then, another pulse, so full of desperate, primal strength it was a physical blow. Fight. Just like that, the anchor of guilt that had been drowning her shattered. His forgiveness, his belief in her even now was a fire that burned away her despair. It was replaced by a rage so pure, so absolute, it was a living thing inside her. Her mistake wasn't her plan to save them. Her mistake was trying to do it alone. Her mistake was lying to the other half of her soul. That mistake would not happen again. As if fate demanded it, she realized she wasn't alone in the dark. A small, pained groan came from the corner of the cell. "Lena?" Seraphina whispered, recognizing one of the young warriors who had been in the quarry. "He got me on the retreat," the she-wolf rasped, her arm bent at an unnatural angle. "Sarah, I'm sorry. We failed." "No," Seraphina said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. "We haven't, not yet." She moved to Lena's side. "Tell me about this place, about him. I need a weakness." Lena coughed, her eyes bright with a feverish light. "He's not like us. His power, it isn't his own. Lyra always said he was a parasite." She took a shuddering breath. "This fortress, it's built over something, a stone, a corrupted heart of the earth. He draws his power from it. He has to stay near it, especially when he uses his stronger magic. If he's ever cut off from it, he's vulnerable," Seraphina finished, the pieces clicking into place. She had a target. The rage in her chest now had a direction. She wasn't a victim waiting for the harvest. She was a strategist, and her war was about to begin. "The ritual is at moonrise," Lena whispered, her face pale in the gloom. "He wants to use the celestial alignment to maximize the power he drains from you." "Then we don't have much time," Seraphina replied, her mind racing, weaving together the disparate threads of her identity. She was not just a witch. She was not just a scientist. She was both, and she was a mate. The final plan had to use everything she was. "I need a distraction," she said, her voice low and urgent. "A big one. What do the guards eat? What do they store in this fortress?" Lena's eyes widened as she understood. For the next hour, they talked. Lena described the storerooms, sacks of dried mushrooms, some of them toxic if not prepared correctly, barrels of sulfur for tanning hides, jars of saltpeter for preserving meat. Seraphina's scientific mind lit up. Sulfur, saltpeter, and a carbon source. She could make a crude but effective smoke bomb. More than that, with the right toxic fungi, she could create a disorienting, noxious gas. It was a logical, scientific solution to a magical problem. But that was only part one. The distraction would be useless if she couldn't get to the Heartstone. And for that, she needed Kaelen. She sat back, closing her eyes, and reached for the bond. It was faint, stretched thin by distance and Kaelen's poisoned wound. But it was there. She pushed past her own fear and doubt, pouring all of her will, all of her love down that fragile thread. "Kaelen, can you hear me?" For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, a flicker, a feeling of warmth, of recognition. "I have a plan," she sent, focusing on images, on intent. She showed him the smoke, the chaos. She showed him her true target, not Merrick, but a great black stone pulsing with sick energy. The stone is his power. "I'm going for the stone. At moonrise, when they come for me, I need you to create a diversion in the cells, a riot, anything. Just give me a window." She felt his response, not in words, but in a surge of fierce, defiant pride, a promise. He trusted her. Even after everything, he trusted her. The final piece of the plan was a prayer. Her power couldn't touch the dead earth of the fortress, but maybe the living world outside could touch it. She turned her focus inward, away from the stone walls and the despair, She sent a silent, desperate plea out into the world, a call from one of her mother's long-forgotten daughters. She called to the deep roots of the ancient forests, to the stubborn life that persisted in the dark places of the world. "Help me," she pleaded. "He is a blight upon you. Help me cut him out." She didn't know if anyone or anything was listening. She had fired her last arrows into the darkness. As the first sliver of moonlight pierced the tiny grate high on her cell wall, she heard the heavy tread of guards approaching. The time had come. The guards hauled her from the cell, their grips like iron on her arms. Lena had already been taken, presumably back to the main holding area. As they marched down the cold stone corridor, a strange, acrid smoke began to drift from the direction of the barracks. The guards coughed, their eyes watering. The distraction had begun. At the exact same moment, a roar of pure, untamed fury erupted from the dungeons below. It was Kaelen. The sound was followed by the crash of bodies against bars, the shouts of surprised guards, the primal sounds of a full-scale prison riot. The warriors holding Seraphina faltered, their attention split. In the span of a breath, she moved. She stomped down hard on one guard's instep and drove her elbow sharply into the throat of the other. They stumbled back, gagging, and she was free. She didn't fight. She ran, not toward the exit, but deeper, down a spiraling staircase that led into the fortress's foundations, following the sickening, powerful trail of corrupted energy. The fortress was in chaos. Alarms blared. Shouts echoed. She was a ghost in the machine, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She raced through the dark, her path lit only by the faint, sickly green glow that was growing stronger with every step. As she ran, she felt it. A tremor. A deep, resonant vibration in the stone beneath her feet. It wasn't the fortress shaking from the riot. It was something else. Something alive. She glanced down. There, forcing its way through a hairline crack in the ancient flagstones, was a single, pale, determined root. It pulsed with a faint green light. Her prayer had been answered. A surge of power, of hope so potent it was a physical force, flooded through her. The earth remembered her. She was not alone. The living world was fighting its way in to help. Fueled by this new strength, she burst through a final archway and into a vast natural cavern. The air here was vibrating, the green-black light overwhelming. In the center of the cavern, suspended in a web of crackling dark energy, was a crystalline stone the size of a man. The Heartstone. It pulsed with a sickening, cancerous life, and she could feel it draining the very life from the land around it for miles. Standing before it, his back to her, was Merrick. He turned, his face a mask of incandescent fury as he realized he'd been tricked, his eyes blazing with murderous rage. "You!" he hissed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. The alarms screamed. The sounds of Kaelen's battle roared from the dungeons above. The lone, determined root at her back pulsed with the promise of the living world. And before her stood her enemy, momentarily separated from the battle, standing before the source of all his power. She was no longer the victim. She was no longer the sacrifice. She was the invasion. And the final battle had just begun. The cavern pulsed with a sickening, corrupt light. Merrick stood before the Heartstone, a god in his own dark temple, a triumphant, cruel smile twisting his lips. The sounds of Kaelen's desperate battle raging above were a faint, chaotic backdrop to their final stand. "You," Merrick hissed, his voice a low, dangerous growl of pure fury. "You thought you could defy me? Here? At the very source of my power?" He laughed, a sound devoid of all humor. Between one breath and the next, his form shimmered and twisted. He grew larger, his muscles bunching, dark fur sprouting along his arms, his face elongating into a horrifying mix of man and wolf. He was a monster, an unnatural hybrid crackling with the stone's black and green energy. "I am going to enjoy this," he snarled and lunged. But Seraphina didn't brace for a fight. She moved. Her terror was gone, replaced by a strange, crystalline calm. She was a scientist facing a problem. The problem wasn't Merrick. He was just a symptom. The problem was the disease, the corrupted stone. Merrick was a blur of speed and fury, his claws tearing through the air where she had been a second before. She didn't try to fight back. She dodged, she evaded, using the chamber's uneven floor to her advantage. Her connection to the single living root behind her was a tiny anchor of hope. She drew on it not for a grand attack, but for small things. A spray of loose gravel to make him slip. A sudden tremor in the rock to throw off his balance. It wasn't a battle, it was a race. "He's too strong, Sarah." She felt Kaelen's desperate, pained thought flicker through their bond. He was weakening. The riot couldn't last forever. "I'm not fighting him," she sent back, her focus absolute as she ducked under another savage swipe. "I'm fighting the stone." Merrick roared in frustration, batting her aside like a doll. She crashed against the cavern wall, the impact stealing her breath. He stood over her, his claws raised for the final, killing blow. "It's over, little witch." Her will faltered. The pain, the exhaustion, it was too much. But then, as if he had kicked down a door in her soul, she felt a sudden, overwhelming flood of pure, unconditional love wash through the bond. It was Kaelen. It was his strength, his belief, his fierce, protective heart pouring into her, a shield against the darkness. "Fight!" his soul screamed at her, and she did. With a final, desperate surge of strength, she scrambled away from Merrick and threw herself at the Heartstone. She slammed her palms flat against its cold, vibrating surface. Merrick lunged, too late to stop her, but she didn't attack it. She didn't try to shatter it. She did the last thing he ever expected. She opened her heart and poured everything she was into the stone. She poured in the fierce, protective love she felt for Alara. She poured in the deep, soul-shattering love she felt for Kaelen. She poured in the memory of her ancestors, the hope for the pack, and the raw, vibrant life force of a witch who had finally come home to herself. It was a massive, magical transfusion of pure, untainted life. The stone screamed. The black, corrupt energy inside it recoiled, unable to coexist with the purity of her magic. Merrick, physically tethered to the corruption, shrieked as his stolen power was ripped away from him, his hybrid form dissolving. A wave of brilliant, cleansing green light erupted from the stone, a silent, beautiful explosion. It washed over Merrick, and he dissolved into dust, his final agonized cry swallowed by the light. The cavern fell silent. The great Heartstone, now a soft, gentle green, pulsed one last time before its light faded, going dormant and pure. And as the sounds of fighting above finally died down, Seraphina, her energy spent, collapsed to the stone floor, her world fading to a peaceful, welcome black. She woke to a gentle touch on her cheek. Her eyes fluttered open. Kaelen was kneeling over her, his face bruised and bloodied, but his golden eyes were shining with a look of such profound love and awe that it made her chest ache. The chaos was over. He was here. He was safe. "Sarah?" He breathed, his voice thick with emotion. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious, fragile thing in the universe. "You did it." "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse, leaning her head against his chest and feeling the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. "We did it." He helped her to her feet, her body weak but whole. They emerged from the cavern into the aftermath. Merrick's remaining rogues, their alphas dominating magic gone, had surrendered. The fortress was secured. Lena, her arm in a makeshift sling, was helping to organize the prisoners. And then she saw her. Alara, pale and tear-streaked but blessedly unharmed, being shielded by a protective wall of pack warriors. The sisters ran to each other, a collision of sobs and desperate hugs. "I thought he was going to," Alara began. "He can't hurt you anymore," Seraphina promised, holding her tight. "He can't hurt anyone ever again." In the days that followed, they healed. They tended to their wounded, mourned their dead, and slowly, The grim shadow of Merrick's reign began to recede. Kaelen, his wound now healing thanks to Lyra's care, was every inch the alpha, a calm, decisive leader who saw to the needs of his people with a gentle strength that made Seraphina's heart swell with pride. One evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the now peaceful settlement, he gently took her hand and turned her to face him. He touched the mark on her shoulder, his fingers tracing the faint, silvery pattern it had become. "It started with this," he murmured, his voice full of the memory of that day's violence and desperation. "A primal, possessive act I couldn't control. And I hated you for it," she admitted softly, without any of the old fear or anger. "I know," he said. He met her gaze, his golden eyes clear and true. "But what is it now, Seraphina?" She leaned into his touch, her body relaxed and trusting in a way it had never been before. "It's the beginning," she whispered. "It was always the beginning. It's the path that brought me home." And as he lowered his head to kiss her, she knew with absolute certainty that the core emotional question that had haunted her was finally answered. The love born from violation had been reforged through choice and sacrifice into a bond that was pure, unbreakable, and true. Months later, the sun slanted through the trees of the Heartwood glade. The forest was more vibrant, more alive than ever before, humming with a gentle, powerful energy. Seraphina walked a familiar path, her bare feet sinking into the soft, rich loam. She trailed a hand over the leaves of a fern, and it unfurled a little further, as if greeting an old friend. She was no longer a desperate scientist searching for a cure. She was a guardian, a partner to this land. She used her unique blend of scientific knowledge and intuitive magic to help the pack thrive, creating new herbal remedies and teaching them how to cultivate the glade's rarest plants. A twig snapped behind her. She smiled without turning. "You're getting better," she said. "I almost didn't hear you." Kaelen's arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and he rested his chin on her shoulder. "Almost," he rumbled, his voice full of contentment. He was at peace, the lonely, burdened alpha now a confident leader with his mate by his side. They were equals, a perfect fusion of wildness and wisdom. "Look who we found!" a bright voice called out. They turned to see Alara, her cheeks rosy with health, walking toward them, her arm linked with Lena's. Alara had chosen to stay, her curiosity about her family's magical legacy and this vibrant, loving community too strong to ignore. She was studying with Lyra, finding her own place in this world. The four of them stood together in the heart of the glade, a strange and beautiful family forged in fire and magic. The mark on Seraphina's shoulder was no longer a brand of possession, but a quiet, shimmering symbol of a love that had broken a curse, saved a pack, and healed two worlds. The nightmare was over, and a new, beautiful life was just beginning.